The corporate education reform model seeks to apply free market and corporate business practices to reforming public education and transform public education into a subsidized entrepreneurial sector of the economy.
The corporate education reform model is a process to take public education, the institution of public education as we know it, and convert it to a free enterprise market, basically. The idea being that free market system would be more efficient, and that competition amongst entities would result in a better product. I think also there's a big push behind it from the ability to make money, since public education is a $600 billion a year industry. The one thing that needs to happen for this model to work is they have to eliminate geographic boundaries. So school districts wouldn't exist as we know it. Even schools wouldn't have boundaries. So you would essentially operate like an American business would. You know, you sell your product, your educational product, and the market chooses you if you fit their needs. And the tool that they use for this is the standardized test, or rather I should say the tool they misuse for this is the standardized test. They use that to legitimize the need for this free market model. That's how I would simply put it.
Well, I think it really is just simply how do we profit off public education? I think the reality is that there's somewhere around $700 billion in tax money going to K through 12 education in the United States. Well, if you're looking for a new profit center, there it is. And so the corporate education model is really prove the public education is failing, and then privatize it, and then make money off privatizing public schools. Professor Noliwe Rooks just wrote a book called Cutting School. And in that book, she calls that segronomics. And the profiting off of poor segregated schools.
And I would say it's a bipartisan effort to collapse the traditional public school model. So if you look, the education reform movement has really been in place for a good 2 to 3 decades. And like Lori said, they use the accountability system and they use it to test and punish, and they use it to shut down schools and eliminate what they consider the losers. And the losers are usually poor and minority communities who need more resources. And I think of it as wholesale, like Diane Ravitch says, wholesale privatization. It's a way to, if you notice, like in Texas, the legislature cut $5.4 billion in funding in 2011. So I see it as a means to decrease the public funding so it can increase the private sector coming in to be the solution when it's broken on purpose.
Corporate education reformers tout programs claiming such miracles as closing the achievement gap while offering unverified results using unreliable data. In the name of improving schools, reformers promote practices such as allowing private partnerships to manage school districts and using student test scores to justify school closures as well as to determine teacher effectiveness and pay. In practice, these programs concentrate resources in more affluent communities, bolster the gentrification of urban neighborhoods, and reinforce the legacies of segregation and high concentrations of poverty in African American and Hispanic communities.
For example, I worked in a middle school that was a really good little middle school, but it was 85% Mexican, 1 mile from the border, and so a lot of language learners and a lot of poverty. Well, the school could not. We were in California at the time. We were using something called API. Which was just this big bunch of testing that California used for the No Child Left Behind requirements. And this school, of course, didn't test that well. It wasn't awful, but it was pretty weak. Well, that school ended up being all of the faculty was fired. 49% of them were brought back, and new management was brought in because that school was supposedly failing. Well, it wasn't a failing school. It was a great school, but it was in a poor community with lots of language learners. And that's what No Child Left Behind did. And so as a result, you look across America in poor communities, that's where the charter schools are. That's where the schools were closed, because those are the schools that didn't test well.
I just think the trouble is because we do have a system where the testing isn't really fair, and you do end up with the higher salaries do tend to follow the better testers. And I think that they keep trying to make small adjustments to the system to try to make that better, but it's not really playing out in the salary data. That I don't see much change. I've been watching it for 5 years now, and it's not moving that quickly to where I see much difference. It seems to be that, and not seems to be, it factually is that the system that they're claiming is creating so much equity is still not equitable.
And there's been a lot of research done connecting poverty to test scores. What is your insight on that?
Oh, it's a one-to-one correlation. Poverty and test scores. That's the only thing that test scores really test, is poverty, is the economic viability of the student's family. And it's the only thing that has, if you look at it from a statistical point of view, it's the only thing with a high R value, a high correlation constant. Poverty rates will be correlation constants around 0.9, where everything else that you try to correlate testing to will be down in the 0.2 range, and that's on a 1-point scale.
Though pushed forward by federal programs like No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top, the corporate reform agenda has proven at best ineffective and in many cases disastrous to student outcomes across the nation. The reality of these programs is one that defunds public education and narrows the scope of instruction to rote test prep. And though reformers point to state test scores as proof that these models are working, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP scores for Dallas schools show a steady decline in math and reading readiness since the implementation of these corporate education reform programs in 2012.
To also say, with these, the biggest reform that's in place, when you say what does reform look like in Dallas, is the teacher merit pay system, the Teacher Excellence Initiative. And that is what is driving a lot of, obviously, the turnover and the inexperience in our staff now. And, that coupled with the standardized tests from the state and the TEA, the laws have been passed in the state, the TEA having the ability to close schools, take over school boards. You see, we now see in Dallas that we are closing schools. We have labeled failing schools. We are closing them. Our enrollment is decreasing. Charters are growing. Charter enrollment is growing. And so the whole mission of the privatization model is flourishing in Dallas, and that's what we're seeing every day.
The reformsters that come in, they have their programs that they're putting into the schools, and they have their key performance indicator, and in particular is going to be STAR test, and for most of the initiatives, and so they take a very narrow view, one little tiny metric or a KPI, and they zero in on that metric, and that is what they decide to, and they deem school failing based on that.
Well, No Child Left Behind was the federal takeover of public education. Before No Child Left Behind, federal government provided some money basically in Title I funding, but they didn't really try to control the schools. And then No Child Left Behind came up with this whole system of test and punishment that basically what it did is it opened an avenue for privatizing public schools. We'll give them these tests, and then we'll claim they're failing because of how they scored on the tests, and then we'll sell charter schools or vouchers. Race to the Top was basically just a double down on No Child Left Behind, just a little bit more so.
In the next episode, we look at who is behind the corporate education reform movement in Dallas and the hundreds of thousands of dollars that have been pouring into Dallas school board elections in order to elect candidates that push forward programs designed to profitize public education. Follow us at livemediacollective.org.